The gentle rustle of leaves filled the air in Willow Park as a soft breeze moved through the trees. Families gathered near the playground where children laughed and chased each other, their joy punctuating the otherwise serene atmosphere. Benches lined the park's paved pathways, offering shade under the sprawling oaks. The day was perfect, warm sunlight, the scent of freshly cut grass, and the occasional chirp of birds creating a sense of calm. Liam Carter sat on one of those benches, his legs stretched out, hands loosely gripping his phone. He was waiting for his mom, Sophia, to pick him up after basketball practice. He didn't mind the wait, the park was peaceful, and he enjoyed watching life around him. The swings creaked as children leapt from them, and a group of teens nearby tossed a frisbee back and forth. Liam loved the moments like this when the world felt unhurried. He leaned back, taking a deep breath. At 14, Liam was tall for his age, his posture relaxed but his alert eyes taking in his surroundings. He glanced down at his phone, noticing a text from his mom, running 10 minutes late. "Sweetheart, traffic is crazy. Be there soon." Liam sighed and smiled slightly. He wasn't in a rush. He adjusted the straps of his gym bag at his feet and pulled out his water bottle. It was just another afternoon, another ordinary day, but not everyone saw it that way. A few benches away, Evelyn Harper sat stiffly, her hands clutching her purse. She was in her mid-50s, her gray hair neatly pinned back, her floral blouse impeccably ironed. Evelyn was a regular at the park, usually enjoying its tranquility, but today something felt off. Her gaze was fixed on Liam. He hadn't done anything, not really. He was just sitting there, scrolling through his phone. But to Evelyn, that was precisely the problem. Why was he here, by himself? She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him. He didn't look like the other kids she usually saw at the park, the ones with their parents close by, the ones who looked like they belonged. Liam's gym bag and relaxed demeanor only added to her unease. To Evelyn, it didn't matter that he hadn't moved from his bench, or that his focus seemed harmless. What mattered was that he didn't fit the picture she carried in her mind of who belonged in Willow Park. She pressed her lips together. Something had to be done. Liam felt it before he saw her, the prickling sensation of being watched. He glanced up from his phone, his gaze sweeping the park until it landed on Evelyn. Their eyes met, and she immediately looked away, her expression unreadable. Liam frowned, confused. It wasn't unusual for people to notice him. He was used to standing out, whether on the basketball court or in his mostly white neighborhood, but there was something in her look that unsettled him. He shook it off, trying to refocus on his phone, but the feeling lingered. Minutes passed, and Liam could still sense her watching him. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the time on his phone. His mom should be there soon. He decided to ignore the woman. After all, what was the worst that could happen? He wasn't doing anything wrong. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her phone as she opened the 911 app. Her heart raced, her sense of duty overwhelming her hesitation. To her, this wasn't just about suspicion, it was about protecting her community, her neighborhood. "Hello. Yes, I'd like to report something suspicious," she said, her voice rising slightly. "There's a teenager here in Willow Park. He's just sitting on a bench, loitering. It doesn't feel right." The operator on the other end asked for details, but Evelyn's words became more frantic with each passing second. "He looks out of place. I think he's up to something. Can you send someone to check it out?" As Evelyn ended the call, she glanced back at Liam. Her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. She told herself she'd done the right thing. If nothing was wrong, then no harm done. But if something was wrong, she'd prevented it. She watched as two police cruisers turned into the park's entrance minutes later, their flashing lights breaking the peaceful ambiance. Evelyn exhaled in relief. She stayed on her bench, ready to explain her concerns when the officers arrived. Liam heard the approaching sirens before he saw the police cars. His stomach dropped as two cruisers pulled into the park, their red and blue lights casting sharp shadows across the grass. He sat frozen for a moment, confusion and unease washing over him. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting on their belts. One of them, a tall man with a graying beard, scanned the park before locking eyes with Liam. The other officer, a younger man with a stern expression, followed close behind. Liam's pulse quickened. He sat up straighter, instinctively placing his hands on his knees where they were visible. He didn't know why they were here, but he knew what to do. His mother had drilled it into him: stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Speak respectfully. Don't make sudden movements. Excuse me, young man, the taller officer called as they approached. Can we talk to you for a moment? Liam nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, sir, he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. Evelyn watched from her bench, satisfaction and nervousness warring within her. She hoped she hadn't overreacted, but seeing the officers approach Liam confirmed she'd done the right thing. After all, it was their job to handle situations like this. Ma'am, the younger officer called to her. Are you the one who made the call? Evelyn stood, smoothing her skirt. Yes, I am, she said firmly. I noticed this boy sitting here for a long time, and he looked suspicious. I thought it was best to call you. The officer nodded, his expression neutral, and turned back to Liam. We got a call about some suspicious activity. He said, what are you doing here? Liam blinked, his mind racing. I'm waiting for my mom to pick me up. He said carefully. She's running late. I come here all the time. The officer's gaze flicked to Liam's gym bag, then back to his face. Do you have any ID on you? No, sir, Liam said. I'm 14. I don't have a driver's license. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Around them, a small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the tension in the air. Some people held up their phones, recording the interaction. Liam felt a surge of humiliation. He wasn't doing anything wrong, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. Let me call my mom, he said, reaching for his phone. Not yet, the taller officer said, his tone firm. We're still asking you questions. Liam's heart pounded. He'd done everything right, yet it didn't seem to matter. He glanced around, hoping to see his mom's car pulling into the park. He needed her now more than ever. The screech of tires broke through the tense silence. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the park's entrance, and the door opened to reveal a tall woman with a commanding presence. She stepped out, her tailored blazer and sharp heels giving her an air of authority. It was Liam's mother, Mayor Sophia Turner. The crowd murmured in recognition, and the officers stiffened as she approached. Her eyes blazed with controlled fury as she took in the scene. Her son surrounded by police. Fear etched on his face. What's going on here? She demanded, her voice calm but steely. The crowd grew silent as Mayor Sophia Turner strode across the park, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her expression was unreadable, but Liam could see the tension in her jaw, the tightness in her lips. He felt a wave of relief and embarrassment at the same time. His mom had arrived, but not as a quiet rescuer, she had arrived as the mayor. And the entire park was now watching. The officers turned toward her, their posture stiffening as they recognized her. The taller one, Detective Martin Reynolds, cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said, his voice more measured now. We received a call about a suspicious individual in the park, and we're investigating. Mayor Turner's gaze moved between the officers, the crowd, and finally to Liam. Her son was standing perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides, his face a mixture of fear and frustration. She felt a pang in her chest but didn't let it show. Instead, she turned back to the officers. A suspicious individual? She repeated, her tone sharp. You mean my son? Reynolds hesitated, clearly thrown off by the revelation. Ma'am, we weren't aware. You weren't aware because you didn't ask. She interrupted, her voice rising slightly. Did it occur to you to question the validity of the call before approaching a teenager in this manner? The younger officer, clearly nervous, stepped forward. Ma'am, the caller described him as loitering. We're just doing our job. Sophia's eyes narrowed. Your job is to protect and serve. Does sitting on a bench now qualify as loitering? Or was it the color of his skin that made him suspicious? The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Evelyn Harper, still standing near her bench, shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. She had started this, and now it was spiraling far beyond her control. Liam watched his mom with a mixture of awe and unease. He had seen her in action before, at city council meetings, town halls, and press conferences. She was always poised, always commanding, always in control, but this was different. This wasn't just about her position as mayor, this was personal. Mom, it's okay, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't want to make things worse. But Sophia turned to him, her expression softening for just a moment. No, Liam, it's not okay. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder before addressing the officers again. Let's get one thing clear. My son has every right to sit in this park without being harassed. The fact that he's standing here, surrounded by police, is unacceptable. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. Ma'am, we were just responding to a call. If there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Sophia cut in. This is a symptom of a much larger problem. And today, it stops here. Evelyn Harper felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. She hadn't known Liam was the mayor's son, how could she? But now, as Mayor Turner's words rang out across the park, Evelyn realized the gravity of her mistake. She had acted on her assumptions. And now those assumptions were being laid bare for everyone to see. I didn't mean any harm. Evelyn stammered, stepping forward. Her voice was shaky, her earlier confidence replaced by nervousness. I was just trying to look out for the community. He was sitting here alone for so long. And I thought. You thought what? Sophia's voice was quiet but sharp. That a black teenager sitting on a bench was a threat? That my son, waiting for his mother, was somehow dangerous? Evelyn opened her mouth to respond. But no words came out. She looked around, hoping for someone to back her up. But the crowd's faces were a mixture of judgment and discomfort. Sophia took a step closer, her voice carrying across the park. This is exactly why we need to have these conversations. Because people like my son are criminalized for simply existing. And it's not just him, it's countless others who face this kind of bias every single day. Detective Reynolds cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we're just trying to ensure everyone's safety. Everyone's safety? Sophia turned to him, her gaze icy. Tell me, detective, did you feel unsafe when you approached my son? Did he pose any threat to you? Reynolds hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Exactly, Sophia said. Your job is to assess situations fairly, without bias. And yet, here we are. The younger officer, clearly out of his depth, looked at Reynolds for guidance. But Reynolds didn't have much to offer. He knew this situation had spiraled out of control, and the mayor wasn't going to let it go. Liam felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the judgment and pity in their gazes. He hated it. He hated being the center of attention, hated the way this whole situation had unfolded. But as he looked at his mom, standing tall and unwavering, he also felt a surge of pride. She wasn't just defending him, she was fighting for something bigger. Mom, he said softly, his voice steady this time. Can we just go home? Sophia turned to him, her expression softening. She placed a hand on his cheek, her voice gentle. We will, sweetheart. But first, I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. To you or anyone else. The crowd was silent as Sophia addressed them, her voice firm and resolute. This incident is a wake-up call. It's a reminder of the biases that exist in our community. The assumptions we make about people based on nothing but the color of their skin. And it has to stop. She turned to the officers. You have a responsibility to serve everyone in this community equally. That means questioning calls like this. Using your judgment to determine if there's an actual threat, not just responding based on someone's unfounded fears. Sophia's gaze swept over the crowd, landing on Evelyn. And as for you, ma'am, I hope this serves as a moment of reflection. Your assumptions could have led to serious consequences for my son. For that, I hope you think deeply about the impact of your actions. Evelyn's face burned with shame. She mumbled an apology, but it felt hollow, even to her. Sophia guided Liam toward her SUV, the crowd parting to let them through. As they reached the car, Liam looked up at his mom. Do you think this will change anything? He asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Sophia paused, her hand resting on his shoulder. Change doesn't happen overnight, she said, but moments like this, they're the start. And I promise you, Liam, I'll do everything I can to make sure this community becomes a better place. Liam nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. As they drove away from the park, the crowd lingered, their conversations buzzing with the weight of what they had just witnessed. In the days and weeks that followed, the events in Willow Park would ripple through the community, sparking debates, conversations, and eventually, change. But for now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Liam felt a sense of peace, knowing that his mom had stood up for him, and for so much more. The events in Willow Park quickly became the talk of the town. By the time Sophia and Liam arrived home that evening, video clips of the incident had already begun circulating online. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #WillowParkIncident and #JusticeForLiam. The footage showed the police cruisers, the heated confrontation, and Sophia's powerful words. Within hours, it became a flashpoint for debates on racial bias and systemic injustice. At home, Liam scrolled through the comments on the videos. There were supportive messages from strangers who praised his courage and his mother's leadership. But there were also the inevitable detractors, people who dismissed the incident as overblown or defended Evelyn's actions as concerned citizenship. Liam's emotions swirled, relief that the encounter hadn't escalated further, pride in his mom's intervention, but also frustration at the ignorance in some of the comments. He felt like he had been thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. "Liam," Sophia called from the kitchen, her voice steady but tired. "Dinner's ready." He joined her at the table, their usual banter replaced by a heavy silence. Sophia studied her son, her heart aching for what he had endured. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, breaking the quiet. Liam shrugged, poking at his food. "I don't know. Angry, I guess. And embarrassed. Everyone's talking about it now. I didn't want to be part of some big thing." Sophia reached across the table, resting her hand on his. "I know this is hard, sweetheart, but what happened today isn't just about you. It's about something much bigger. And sometimes, we have to face these moments head on, even when it's uncomfortable." Liam nodded, though he still felt the weight of the day pressing down on him. "Do you think Evelyn really believed I was dangerous? Or was she just, I don't know, scared?" Sophia sighed. "Fear and bias often go hand in hand. I think she convinced herself that she was doing the right thing. But that doesn't excuse the harm it caused. We have to hold people accountable for their actions, even when they come from a place of ignorance." The next morning, the Willow Gazette published a front-page story about the incident, complete with screenshots from the video and interviews with witnesses. The headline read, "Mayor confronts racial bias in Willow Park." The article praised Sophia's leadership but also highlighted the deep divisions in the community. Town hall meetings were quickly scheduled to address the growing tensions. Some residents supported Sophia's push for anti-bias training and greater accountability for the police force, while others felt the mayor was overreacting. Evelyn Harper, now a central figure in the controversy, had become a symbol of those defending their actions as protecting the community. At the first town hall, the auditorium was packed. Sophia stood at the front, her presence commanding but calm. Liam sat in the audience, trying to blend into the crowd, though he knew many people recognized him. Sophia opened the meeting with a statement. "What happened in Willow Park was not an isolated incident," she said, her voice firm. "It is a symptom of a larger issue, one that affects not just our community but our entire nation. We cannot ignore it. We must confront it." As she spoke, murmurs rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others crossed their arms, their faces etched with skepticism. When Sophia opened the floor for comments, the tension in the room became palpable. The first to speak was a man in his 40s, who introduced himself as Tom Jacobs, a local business owner. "I respect what you're trying to do, Mayor Turner," he began, "but I think we're blowing this out of proportion. Evelyn was just being cautious. In today's world, you can't be too careful." Sophia's gaze was steady as she responded. "Caution is important, Mr. Jacobs, but it cannot come at the expense of fairness or justice. My son was sitting on a bench in a public park. He wasn't breaking any laws or posing any threat. Yet he was treated like a suspect. Would the same assumptions have been made if he didn't look the way he does?" The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. As the town hall meetings continued, Liam found himself drawn into the conversation. At school, his classmates asked him about what had happened, and he struggled to find the right words to describe the experience. Some students expressed their support, while others remained silent, unsure of how to engage. One day, during his debate club meeting, the coach asked if Liam wanted to share his story. At first, he hesitated, reluctant to relive the humiliation. But as he looked around the room, he realized that this was an opportunity to make a difference. Standing in front of his peers, Liam took a deep breath. I didn't do anything wrong. He began, his voice steady. I was just sitting in the park, waiting for my mom, but someone decided that wasn't okay, that I wasn't okay, because of the way I look. The room was silent as Liam recounted the events of that day. He spoke about the fear he had felt, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal, and the pride he had felt when his mom stood up for him. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice gaining strength. "This happens to people like me all the time, and it needs to stop." When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Liam felt a rush of emotion, relief, pride, and a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. Maybe, just maybe, his story could help change things. Meanwhile, Evelyn Harper was grappling with her own emotions. The backlash she faced had been swift and unforgiving. Her name was now synonymous with racial bias, and she struggled to reconcile the image of herself as a well-meaning community member with the reality of her actions. One afternoon, Evelyn received an invitation to meet with Mayor Turner privately. She debated whether to go but ultimately decided to face the music. When she arrived at City Hall, Sophia greeted her with a calm but firm demeanor. They sat across from each other in Sophia's office, the air heavy with unspoken tension. "Thank you for coming," Sophia began. "I wanted to have this conversation because I believe in accountability. But I also believe in growth." Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to cause harm," she said quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Sophia's gaze softened, but her tone remained resolute. "I understand that, but your actions came from a place of bias, whether you realize it or not. And that bias has consequences, not just for my son, but for our entire community." Evelyn listened as Sophia explained the importance of confronting one's own assumptions and working toward a more inclusive society. By the end of their conversation, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure how to make amends, but she was willing to try. The weeks following the incident in Willow Park were marked by both tension and transformation. Mayor Sophia Turner pushed forward with her promise to implement comprehensive anti-bias training for the police department and city employees. The initiative was met with mixed reactions. Some community members embraced the change, while others questioned its necessity. Detective Martin Reynolds, one of the officers involved in the park confrontation, found himself deeply unsettled. He had replayed the encounter with Liam countless times in his mind. At first, he had dismissed Sophia's accusations as political grandstanding, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized how easily he had accepted Evelyn Harper's narrative without questioning its validity. When the police department announced the start of mandatory anti-bias workshops, Martin was skeptical but attended anyway. The first session began with a series of uncomfortable truths. A facilitator, a civil rights educator named Dr. Maya Harris, walked them through examples of implicit bias, systemic racism, and the real-world consequences of snap judgments. "Bias doesn't make you a bad person," Dr. Harris said, her tone firm but empathetic. "But ignoring it does make you complicit in a system that perpetuates harm. It's not enough to be neutral. You have to actively work to counter your biases." For Martin, the words hit home. He had spent decades on the force, priding himself on his professionalism. But now, he saw how his actions, or lack of action, had contributed to a system that disproportionately targeted people like Liam. He left the workshop determined to do better. At school, Liam's story had become a catalyst for change among his peers. Inspired by his courage, the student council organized a series of discussions on racial bias and inclusivity. Liam, initially hesitant to participate, found himself drawn into the conversations. He realized that sharing his experience could help others understand the impact of their assumptions. One afternoon, during a school assembly, Liam was invited to speak. He stood nervously at the podium, his palms sweaty, but as he looked out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces, his friends, his teachers, even his basketball teammates, all watching him with quiet encouragement. "I didn't ask to be the center of attention," Liam began, his voice steady. "I was just a kid sitting in a park, waiting for my mom, but that one moment, one assumption, changed everything." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "What happened to me isn't unique. It happens every day, in ways big and small. And it's not just about police, it's about how we see each other. How we make judgments without even realizing it." By the time Liam finished, the room was silent. his words resonating deeply. Then, slowly, the applause began, quiet at first, then building into a standing ovation. For the first time since the incident, Liam felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a victim, he was an advocate. Evelyn Harper's life had changed irrevocably since that day in the park. She had avoided public spaces for weeks, overwhelmed by the judgment she felt from her neighbors. But the private meeting with Mayor Turner had sparked something in her, a desire to confront her own biases. No matter how uncomfortable it might be, Evelyn began attending community workshops on racial equity, sitting quietly in the back as she absorbed stories from people whose experiences were vastly different from her own. She volunteered at a local youth center, interacting with children from diverse backgrounds. Slowly but surely, her worldview began to shift. One evening, after a particularly moving workshop, Evelyn decided to write a public letter to the Willow Gazette. In it, she acknowledged her actions and the harm they had caused. "I acted out of fear and ignorance," she wrote. "I made assumptions about a boy I didn't know. And those assumptions were rooted in biases I wasn't even aware I carried. I'm deeply sorry for the pain I caused. And I'm committed to doing better, not just for myself, but for my community." The letter sparked mixed reactions. Some praised her honesty, while others dismissed it as too little, too late. But for Evelyn, it was an important step toward accountability. As the weeks turned into months, the town of Willow Park began to change. The police department launched a series of community engagement initiatives, including meet and greets, open forums, and mentoring programs for youth. Detective Martin Reynolds took a leading role, determined to rebuild trust with the community. Liam became a frequent speaker at these events, his story serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and understanding. He found himself working closely with Dr. Maya Harris, who encouraged him to use his platform to push for systemic change. One day, during the community forum, Liam and Evelyn found themselves face to face for the first time since the incident. The air was thick with tension as Evelyn approached him, her hands trembling. "Liam," she began, her voice shaky but earnest. "I want to say I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change what happened, but I need you to know that I'm trying to do better." Liam studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Evelyn's surprise, he nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. "I hope you do." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. By the time summer arrived, Willow Park had undergone a quiet transformation. The changes weren't dramatic, there were no grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but they were meaningful. The park itself had become a symbol of the community's commitment to progress. A new mural adorned one of the walls near the playground, depicting children of all backgrounds playing together beneath the words, "Everyone belongs." Mayor Sophia Turner continued to advocate for equity and inclusion, both in her city and beyond. Her work drew national attention, with other towns looking to Willow Park as a model for addressing racial bias. But for Sophia, the most meaningful change was seeing her son regain his confidence. One afternoon, as Liam sat on the same bench in Willow Park, he reflected on how far things had come. The fear and humiliation of that day had given way to something unexpected: resilience, purpose, and a sense of belonging. His mom joined him, sitting down with a sigh. "You've come a long way, kiddo," she said, her voice filled with pride. "So have you," Liam replied, smiling at her. They sat in companionable silence, watching as children ran across the grass, their laughter echoing through the park. For the first time in months, Liam felt at peace. The events in Willow Park had a ripple effect far beyond the town's borders. Other cities began adopting similar anti-bias initiatives, inspired by Mayor Turner's leadership. Schools integrated discussions about race and equity into their curriculums, ensuring that the next generation would be better equipped to confront these issues. For Liam, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Though he carried the lessons of that day with him, he continued to speak out, determined to use his voice to create a more just and compassionate world. And for Willow Park, the bench where it all began became a quiet reminder of how one moment, one assumption, and one voice could spark a movement.